In the Middle Ages, the French capital of Paris had its fair share of centuries-old mysteries and secrets. Among them was the era of the alchemists, who claimed they could turn base metals into gold.
The best known of the alchemists was Nicolas Flamel, and the most fascinating thing was the idea that an alchemist could use his artistry to match, if not outdo, nature.
Did Nicolas Flamel really find a way of turning lead into gold? Did he discover the secret of eternal life? Did he have supernatural powers? Light needs to be shed on the arcana of alchemy, and the answer lies here in Paris. I'm Jean-Marc Léry. I've devoted my life to understanding Paris's history, studying its secrets, and wandering its maze of streets. The city holds many centuries-old mysteries. Often these cases are dismissed as occult phenomena, myths, legends, or popular beliefs. Things have happened here, though. There are facts, consistencies, and bona fide witnesses. Historians, scientists, and investigators of all sorts have been unable to solve them. It is time to reveal the most plausible theories and to get as close as possible to the truth. Here's Paris, as you've never seen it before. It was a December evening in 1988. At the time, I was the director of the archives and libraries of the Louvre and National Museums. A stranger came to my department, claiming to be in possession of the Philosopher's Stone, the secret of alchemy. Alchemy has always fascinated man. It promises two extraordinary powers: the ability to turn metals into silver or gold, and the discovery of an elixir which prolongs life. Today, Nicolas Flamel is the most famous of alchemists, for good reason. A number of disturbing pieces of evidence point to this simple Paris scribe and manuscript seller as having acquired great wealth and immortality. Overnight, this modest, middle-class man, for no apparent reason, suddenly found himself in possession of a considerable fortune. And even more astonishing, several people claimed to have seen him after his death. The trace of Nicolas Flamel begins here, close to the bell tower of the old Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie church, near Châtelet in Paris, and we're going to follow it. Did Nicolas Flamel find a way of turning lead into gold? Did he really discover the secret of eternal life? To unravel truth from falsehood, we must first look at the established facts, to trace the path of his life, to bring him back from the mists of time. Nicolas Flamel is at the heart of one of Paris's major legends. He was born between 1330 and 1340, a troubled time with strange beliefs on the difference between good and evil, and of age-old secrets. One of these was alchemy and its extremely mysterious processes. By following several steps, it's said that man could turn lead and other base metals into silver or gold.
There are a certain number of expressions in alchemy which are more or less synonymous, even though they haven't been clarified. For example, magnum opus, or great work. This designates the process that would result in the production of the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone is, in principle, the substance that turns metals into gold. The alchemists sought to discover the basis on which metals rested, what their structure was, how they could be reduced to their rawest material. Because if you could do that, you could recompose them in order to produce the structure of gold. So it did mean that they needed to have a deep knowledge of metallurgy. Probably the most fascinating thing was the idea that an alchemist could use his artistry to match, if not outdo, nature.
Did Nicolas Flamel succeed in outdoing nature? What do we actually know about the real-life Flamel? He left us a few clues. They're in the museums and libraries of Paris. Our investigation requires us to retrace the different stages of his life. With Flamel, we step into medieval Paris. A Paris troubled by various epidemics, such as bubonic plague, wars of religion and revolts. A noisy, stinking Paris desperately trying to solve its unhealthiness. A Paris driven by its growing trade. Like in the central district of the capital with its huge market, Les Halles, and the vast Holy Innocents Cemetery. So it was close to the Place Joachim du Bellay, once the site of the cemetery, that Nicolas Flamel began his career. He started out as a scribe, doing accounts and performing inventories for tradesmen, writing up guardianship papers for minors, death certificates, wills, documents for inheritances and donations, and even perhaps dictations of love letters. In 1360, Flamel moved close to the Saint-Jacques-de-la-Boucherie church. All that remains of the church today is the flamboyant Gothic bell tower, which was added later in the early 16th century. Flamel's business was undoubtedly thriving. His shop was in the city centre, close to the old Châtelet fort, where army and police officers had many acts that needed copying. The printing press was yet to be invented, and monasteries and convents were unable to meet the demand for books, and so scribes made a very decent living. At the time, Paris was growing fast. The merchants and craftsmen who moved in no longer worked exclusively for the nobility or prelates. As independent workers, they acquired a new status, that of burghers of Paris. The royal court, which previously moved from place to place, settled in Paris and drew in nobles. Paris became a modern capital with a huge administrative setup, including the Court of Audit for finances, the Parliament building with its law courts, the Châtelet, which remained police headquarters, and close by, burghers and their families lived on newly developed land around the Hôtel de Ville, the Ile de la Cité, the Louvre, and the Châtelet district. Business was flourishing for Flamel, who was a member of the corporations of booksellers, of parchmenters, of illuminators, of authors, and of bookbinders. He bought a house on the corner of the Rue des Écrivains and the Rue de Marivaux, which in the 19th century was renamed the Rue Nicolas Flamel. A la fleur de lis was the sign Flamel chose to hang above his street door. In 1370, he married Dame Pernelle. She was 20 years his senior and twice widowed, but she had inherited well from her first two husbands and was believed to possess quite a fortune. They wouldn't have any children, and in 1372 they made themselves mutually sole inheritors, excluding Pernelle's sister and her family from their will. It was then that Flamel's life suddenly changed. Here's the legend. Nicolas Flamel had a dream in which an angel told him he would make a fortune from a manuscript. A short time after, a stranger entered his shop and presented him with the Book of Abraham the Jew, which contained the secret of turning metals into silver or gold. For years, Flamel was unable to decipher the text to reveal its secrets. Around 1378, he went on a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, a common practice at the time, and returned 2.5 years later. On his travels, he met a wise old converted Jew who gave him the key to deciphering the manuscript. On April 25th, 1382, Flamel and Pernelle turned half a pound of lead into gold. Flamel had managed to decipher the Book of Abraham the Jew and of alchemy. And Flamel's sudden wealth seemed to everyone to have come just like magic. In 1382, Flamel made donations to the 9 guilds he was a member of, and then to 14 churches and hospitals. In 1397, Dame Pernelle died. Flamel won the lawsuit filed by his wife's family and continued donating money to works of charity. In 1402, he paid for the reconstruction of the doorway of the church Sainte-Geneviève-en-la-Cité. In 1407, he erected a tomb for Dame Pernelle in the Holy Innocent Cemetery, on which he had engraved an epitaph in verse. And he paid for a new arcade for the charnel house on the Rue Saint-Denis. All of this was very expensive. Nobody knew where the money came from. But Flamel carried on. He built houses, providing free accommodation to the poor, like in 1407 at 51 Rue de Montmorency. At this address these days is a restaurant. This house, one of the oldest in Paris, is known worldwide as the home of Nicolas Flamel. But Flamel never actually lived here. On the face of the house is an inscription indicating that it was built to take in needy farm labourers coming to Paris. Flamel is also attributed with founding and investing other such hostels and assets. Flamel continued investing until his death in 1418. His tombstone is kept in Paris at the Musée de Cluny, the National Museum of the Middle Ages. It attracts tourists from across the globe and has become an object of fascination.
The so-called tombstone of Nicolas Flamel is both a very ordinary and exceptional object. The tombstone is just a rectangle of quite modest dimensions. In the upper section, in the center, is the figure of Christ giving his blessing and holding a celestial globe. He's surrounded by 2 figures of saints, most likely those to whom Nicolas Flamel was especially devoted, Saint Peter and Saint Paul. In the lower part, Nicolas Flamel himself is represented in the form of his cadaver. It's very realistic. There's no enhancement. He isn't magnified at all, merely depicted as a corpse. And there's a short phrase accompanying this depiction: "From the earth I came, to the earth I return." This seems to me to be one of the essential points of the plaque, which testifies to all of Nicolas Flamel's interest in this philosophy. We know that the plaque was fitted beneath a statue of the Virgin Mary in the choir of the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie. The church was demolished in 1797, and this tombstone is the only object from inside it in the museum's possession. Legend has it that it was found in a greengrocer's shop. He had been using it to chop up spinach. In any case, that's how the legend goes.
The legend of Nicolas Flamel grew even more in amplitude after he had died. As crazy as it seems, a number of people claimed to have seen him many years after his death. If he really had managed to turn lead into gold, why couldn't he have drunk the elixir of immortality? Rumors about the subject soon began to circulate. His coffin was opened and found empty, or inside there was just a piece of wood. His wife, Pernelle, hadn't died either. She had gone secretly to live in Switzerland, where Flamel joined her a few months after his official death. The legend of his immortality spread around the world and has continued down the ages. In the early 17th century, a stranger presented himself to Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu. He swore he had met Flamel and learned his secret. He claimed to possess both the Book of Abraham the Jew and some alchemical powder. In 1712, Paul Lucas, Louis XIV's antiques dealer, told of how, while travelling in Turkey, a dervish had confirmed that he had met Flamel in the Indies 3 years earlier. He was spotted in the French embassy in Turkey in 1747 and in 1754. He was seen with Dame Pernelle at the Versailles Opera in 1761, more than 350 years after his death. This first urban myth was fired by more rumors, pure fabrications, and hearsay. I know a man who met a man who told him he knew someone who had seen Flamel. People searched for him in places he was thought to have frequented. Generations of alchemists returned to look in his house for centuries. In May 1818, leaflets left on tables in Parisian cafes and taverns announced the return of Nicolas Flamel. He would be giving classes in alchemy at number 22 Rue de Cléry. The list of those who had spotted him was endless. But another episode tied in with the search for Flamel and his secrets, perhaps the most astonishing and disturbing of all. This lead takes us from Paris across France to a place where the mystery of Nicolas Flamel intertwines with another, that of the treasure of Rennes-le-Château. In the late 19th century, the opera singer Emma Calvé was an international star. She was interested in the occult and in 1894 purchased the Château de Cabrières in Rouergue, an old province in southwestern France. It was believed that in this strange castle, a mecca of the occult and the esoteric in the region, Flamel's copy of the Book of Abraham was hidden. Still today, nobody has any idea of how the manuscript could have ended up there. At the same time, in Rennes-le-Château in the Aude department, a priest, Father Béranger Saunière, suddenly became the owner of a vast fortune, the origin of which nobody knew, and began lavish restoration work on his church. Rumours spread that the priest was Emma Calvé's lover, that he was in possession of the Book of Abraham the Jew, and therefore the secret of Nicolas Flamel. This was surely what was behind his sudden wealth. During World War II, in their quest for the Philosopher's Stone and the Holy Grail, even the Nazis visited Rennes-le-Château to look for the key to the mystery. The reality is that Father Saunière had never met Emma Calvé. What's more, she died in poverty and had never had access to the cellars of Cabrières. Also, Father Saunière never discovered the Book of Abraham the Jew, thought to have belonged to Flamel, containing the secrets of alchemy. But it was one more episode to feed the mysterious legend of Nicolas Flamel. So what about Nicolas Flamel? Was he truly an alchemist?
The most famous alchemist in the world, poor old Nicolas Flamel, never performed alchemy. But at some point during that time, somebody made up an entire story. And it was this story called Book of the Hieroglyphical Figures of Nicolas Flamel, which gave rise to the legend that we all know today. Another decisive step in the success of the Flamel the Alchemist myth was when people began interpreting the figures he had painted on one of the arches of the Holy Innocent Cemetery. Because that was one of the practices of the pious benefactors of the day, to build arcades and decorate them in the way they believed was the most appropriate.
We have solved the first mystery. Nicolas Flamel was not proficient in alchemy and had never even dabbled in it. All of these writings are untrue. They helped to build a legend around a simple burgher of Paris. But what about his overnight fortune? The reality is much more prosaic. Flamel was a very successful scribe and manuscript seller. And his marriage brought him more money. Dame Pernelle was very wealthy after inheriting from her first two husbands, and she left everything to Flamel. And regarding his real estate investments, these were not as costly as many have suggested. Likewise, the donations he made were small amounts, but he made them pretty much everywhere, which gave the impression of him as extremely rich. The drawn-out lawsuit he fought to prevent his wife's family from claiming the inheritance, a trial which was still spoken about 50 years after his death, along with the long form of his will, both contributed to people's belief that this man was filthy rich, when in fact, he was just a well-off burgher. It was also said that Flamel got his hands on the wealth of certain Jews chased out of Paris by King Charles VI. But this part of the legend appeared much later, in the early 17th century. Here too, everything was invented, amplified, and deformed. In the late Middle Ages, mysteries were very popular. It was fun to believe that a pious burgher may have been taken over by dark forces and the world of alchemy. Today, the true history of Nicolas Flamel is muddled with his legend. Alas, nobody ever has turned lead into gold. And some people are still searching for the secret of immortality. But Paris has other mysteries. The clues and keys to these enigmas are to be found in old books, lost in the capital's libraries, in the city's streets or beneath its buildings, by the light of a candle or in the dead of night, by cross-checking documents, archives, and records. Paris has not yet revealed all of its secrets.